Hi, I'm Mark Suzman, the CEO of the Gates Foundation, and I'd like to welcome you to this panel on ending the current pandemic and preparing for the next one. As you've already heard, this is really the worst of times and the best of times in global health. The worst of times because we are facing an unprecedented challenge. And it is a challenge that you've already heard about the scale and scope across the world. But it is also the best of times for grand challenges in global health because never before has there been so much energy and conversation around the needs of global health and the importance of investing in global health research and development. So before I kick off this panel, I'd first like to just apologize briefly for some of the technical difficulties we've been having. One of the downsides of the global challenges, grand challenges in global health is across multiple continents and multiple time zones, it is challenging to put it all together, but it's amazing that we are able to bring in a much wider and broader audience than we traditionally do. And so that audience hopefully will be able to hear now from an amazing panel, which starts with Bill Gates, the co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and my boss, Dr. Vardhan, the Minister for Health and Family Welfare, Science and Technology and Earth Sciences at the Government of India, Matshidiso Moeti, the Regional Director of the World Health Organization Regional Office for Africa, Kiran Mazumdar, the Executive Chairperson of Biocon, and Kate Bingham, the Chair of the United Kingdom Vaccine Taskforce. And Bill, I'd like to kick off with you. You've already given us an exciting vision about the kind of platforms that we might use to prepare for the next pandemic and that you hope grand challenges will provide impetus for. But you've been warning about the risks of a pandemic for some time. And as we face this one, what have you been most surprised and disappointed by? And where do you see the most grounds for optimism?
Yeah, in 2015, after the Western Africa Ebola crisis, I and many other people who work in global health spoke out about how it showed that we really weren't ready for a widespread epidemic. And there was a discussion at that time about getting antiviral libraries ready, getting quick antibody capacity available, and advancing these vaccine platforms, including the mRNA platform. Far less was done than would have been ideal, but one thing that was done was the creation of CEPI that India, UK, Japan, Norway, Wellcome Trust, and ourselves have been involved in, and that's been able to scale up and now, along with the US funding for R&D, playing a very big role in driving things forward here. So I think it's amazing the amount of talent focused on not only the vaccines, but diagnostic and therapeutic as well. I would say the world still, it's unclear in terms of finding the resources to get the procurement for all of these things, but I'll focus on the vaccine. How do we make sure that it's not just, once it's done, going to the rich countries who've done reservations, but the entire world? And there's two challenges there. One is the scale of the manufacturing, and the second is the resources to buy those vaccines. And so, we're hopeful that the COVAX AMC with Gavi playing a key role can fulfill that, but we still don't have all the pledges to make that a reality. So I'd give it some incomplete on that, just like in terms of these new tools, we're not yet there with the emergency use authorization.
Thank you. So Minister Vardhan, if I could turn to you, and as always with India, India impresses with scale, both the scale of the response your government has made to the current crisis and the unprecedented scale of testing, treatment, PPE provisions, but also the scale of the response preparing for the arrival, we hope, of a vaccine and the distribution of a vaccine. And I'd love you to reflect, please, on both where you've seen the biggest challenges to date, but also why you're most excited about India's potential to contribute not just to the national health response, but to the global response.
Thank you, Mark. I think this has been a journey for more than 9 months now. And the most important thing that excites me is the fact that virtually everyone in India, starting from the medical professionals to the frontline workers, to the scientists, to the innovators, to the industry experts, to the businesses, and of course the societal people like NGOs, everybody rose to the occasion without wasting even a single day. And the whole country stood along with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. One of the most exciting thing was that most of the things in the initial stages, we were finding shortages, we were importing, whether it was the testing kits, whether it was the PPE kits or the N95 masks or the ventilators. But everyone, the scientists, engineers, everyone rose to the occasion, and most of these things we are now in a position to export. We started with just one lab, and we were importing all these kits from outside. Today, when I talk to you after 9 months, we have 1962 labs spread across each and every district of India. And in the initial stages, everyone used to embarrass us by saying that you are doing only a few thousand tests. Today in India, in a country of 1.35 billion people, every day we are doing something between 1 and 1.5 billion tests. We have already done over 97 million tests in the whole country. And on virtually every front, we have been able to create good quality infrastructure with over 2 million beds in our COVID dedicated facilities, thousands of quarantine centers, and the whole country, the scientists, the laboratories, whether it was their mandate or not, they were doing virtually everything. They were isolating the virus, they were doing the genome sequencing, they were working for vaccine development, they were supporting the startups, they were supporting the young innovators, they were working on drug discovery, they were working on repurposing of drugs. And it was a whole government, whole society approach. And finally, I would say the most exciting thing happened on 22nd of March in India. The Prime Minister had in his mind a strategy to announce a complete lockdown for the country. And just about 2 days before that, he appealed to the countrymen with an innovative idea of his that we should all participate in a Janta curfew, self-imposed curfew when we will not move out of our homes. And at 5 o'clock in the evening, everybody in the country will come out of the house and just felicitate the medical professionals and the health workers. And not even one single home in the whole country was an exception. The whole country stood like a rock to make that Janta curfew a success. And that is why it was followed by a lockdown. There are so many exciting moments of this journey, although we feel sad that there are so many of our frontline workers, our COVID warriors, whom we have lost. We always feel sorry for them. But I think it has been a great fight, jointly organized and under the leadership of our Prime Minister. Everybody rose to the occasion. I think it was very, very exciting for me as the Health Minister of India.
Director Moeti, Africa has faced similar challenges and have taken multiple responses, but in aggregate, I think it's safe to say the African response has been a very powerful one and much better than many expected, given the limited resources available in health. And I'd love you to reflect a little bit on the continent's experience from dealing with other diseases, and particularly the Ebola epidemic, and say what lessons you think the continent learned from that, and what led to the sort of strong response that has taken place to date at regional and national level.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark, and I'm so happy to be part of this Grand Challenges panel. Yes, the Ebola outbreaks and the many other outbreaks, Lassa fever, yellow fever, meningitis, cholera that African countries experience really helped to be better prepared and had some very important lessons to offer for this pandemic response. After the West Africa Ebola outbreak, countries have established emergency operations centers, and they fairly quickly activated national incident management systems to coordinate what was done in the response. And already there was points of screening going on, fairly well established in relation to the Ebola outbreak that ended in the DRC. And very much these capacities were built as the response to the West Africa situation. I've been very encouraged by the strong political commitment, which has translated into action by African leaders, starting at the continental level. So the African Union, again, lesson learned from the Ebola outbreak, had played a strong role in bringing them together quickly at the continental level. And we saw some concrete actions being taken by national leaders, as well as the quick establishment of multi-sectoral platforms at a high level to organize the responses. The cross-border work established through the Ebola outbreak, other outbreaks, had countries sharing information across borders. And now they're very much dealing with the issue of movement of people across borders using the same platforms to make sure that testing is carried out, results are shared to minimize the risk. Let me say here that the Africa CDC, which is an organization of the African Union, also played a strong role. We have information management during the current outbreak, which learned a lot from Ebola, from polio. So dashboards are being developed, situation reps are being put out every day. Mapping capacities have increased a lot in the countries. One of the most important lessons learned is about involving people, engaging communities. You remember the very painful scenes in the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. And this has been brought to bear because people we've understood will play one of the most important roles in all of this. I'd just like to end this comment by saying that after that Ebola outbreak, WHO worked with partners to help all of our countries in the African region evaluate their preparedness capacities in relation to the international health regulations. And national action plans have been developed to address their biggest gaps. These have helped in some of the earlier actions in response to this COVID-19 pandemic. But just to put in a word that many of them remain largely unfunded. So one of the lessons that I think need to be taken on board is the importance of investing in preparedness. This is something that I'm very much hoping will come out of this experience. Thank you, Mark.
Great, thank you. And yes, we will definitely come back to the investing in preparedness. But for right now, just sticking with the current response and any of the current pandemic, I'd like to turn to you, Kiran, and ask about the role of industry. As a longtime leader in biopharma, this has been an overused word, but very true, an unprecedented period of investment and energy where the world looks to the industry to try and bring the tools, the therapeutics, the diagnostics, and above all, the vaccine. And I'd love you to reflect both on what has been different about this response and what has excited you, but also where you see some of the challenges going forward.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for inviting me to this Grand Challenges panel. Let me start by saying that the collective collaboration that we have seen between scientists, between countries, regulatory agencies, and organizations is unprecedented. And I think this is something which we must actually emulate for a long time to come. Now, what is really interesting for me to see in this pandemic is the kind of regulatory approach to ensuring that they accelerate the regulatory processes so that they could enable faster access to whether it is, therapeutics and vaccines and even diagnostic tests. And we've seen this in the form of, the emergency use authorizations. We've seen this in the Operation Warp Speed that has been applied. And these are very interesting regulatory models, which I think is very, very different in the past because of the need for rapid response to this pandemic. It's also very interesting to see the way governments have used large amounts of public funds to address this public health crisis. And I think this is a template that we ought to emulate going forward. If you look at Operation Warp Speed, I think Congress has earmarked $10 billion. And this has been used to facilitate the development, manufacturing, and the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. And I think these are very, very interesting times because I think the way the regulations have been used, the way the efforts have come together is actually going to help us in a very big way to bring medicines and vaccines much faster to patients, even in the future. Now, coming to what I believe is important for industry to look at is really three aspects. One is technology to basically distribute vaccines. Secondly, it is really about the infrastructure, the logistics infrastructure required to deliver vaccines. And the third is, of course, to ensure equitable patient access. And here I just want to comment on what India can do in terms of doing all of this. And I think our unique identification number, the UID or Aadhaar, is a very technologically enabling way to create a sort of a consent-based national database of vaccination. And I think this is going to be very important, given the fact that you're going to have a staggered approach to the availability of vaccines. You're going to have multiple challenges because there are some vaccines that need a booster dose, some vaccines that need adjuvant, some vaccines that are going to be, a single dose vaccine, to track all of this. And then you're doing it at warp speed, so you don't have enough data about these vaccines. So durability of response. Are there going to be, any kind of unexpected, events after a certain period of time, etc., etc. If you have this kind of a technology-led vaccination program, you can track, trace, and respond very rapidly, as and when you learn more about the vaccines. So I think this is a huge opportunity for India because we have this unique number and we must use it for this kind of a pandemic. In terms of basically the infrastructure, as you know, vaccine, the logistics is going to be very important because you do need a cold chain. And given the fact that many of these vaccines are double dose vaccines, which are a month apart, you will need vaccine storage. You will need to make sure that you have a number of, it's going to require a massive planning exercise to get vaccines to where it's required. Moreover, even though India has had this huge experience in polio vaccination, we must remember that the polio vaccine was an orally delivered vaccine and it was done over an extended period of time. Today, you're trying to do everything in a compressed period of time. You want to vaccinate a large population in a very short span of time. So this is going to require massive planning. The logistics planning is going to be important. And I think here, both the public and private sector infrastructure must be leveraged. I think companies like ours, which actually have, cold chains, I think those kind of things need to be piggybacked upon. The government also has a very efficient cold chain, but I think we need to bring everything together. And then I think we must make sure that when we talk about equitable access to vaccines, India is the right example where we must make sure that the poor have equitable access to the vaccines. The rural poor also have equitable access to the vaccines, just like urban India will have. I think, unfortunately, you will start prioritizing urban centers first. But I really think as a country, we ought to look at our rural, hinterland to see how we can use technology, how we can use infrastructure better, and how we can actually create the human resource required to inject these vaccines into people. That's going to be another big challenge. There are many opportunities for us to think out of the box. So I think I'll end my comments there by saying that industry needs to work very closely with. I think there has to be a very strong partnership, public-private partnership that we've seen across the board when it comes to this pandemic. And I really think this is the way we ought to work in the future. Public health and healthcare in general has to be a very, very strong public-private partnership.
Great, thank you, Kiran. So, Kate, if I could turn to you, and you have experience both in private industry and now in the public sector, and so you're very well placed to talk about that private-public balance. But I'd also, and I know that you've said one of the things that keeps you up at night is the challenges of distribution, exactly the kind of challenges Kiran's just outlined. But perhaps before you talk about that, I'd love to go back to the point Bill raised right at the start, which was his concern about the financing and the support that we need. He mentioned the COVAX initiative, which is the global initiative hosted by Gavi and this multilateral coalition, which is trying to pool resources and money, and the government of India is a participant, the government of the United Kingdom is a participant, many countries are, but you are balancing both bilateral investments as the United Kingdom in many of those potential products and the multilateral investments in COVAX. And if you could just talk about how you think about prioritizing that or balancing between the two.
Thank you, Mark. So the task that we've been given as part of the UK Vaccine Taskforce is to do three things. The first is to secure vaccines for the UK. The second is to ensure international equitable access for everybody who needs it around the world. And the third is to make sure we're better prepared for next time. So as the politicians, they have a duty to protect their citizens, and therefore one of our goals, the first goal, was to secure vaccine for the UK, which we did. And we did so quickly by bringing in basically a private sector team, and within 100 days, I think we had the portfolio of 6 different vaccines secured. But the key thing for us is this is not a UK pandemic, this is a global pandemic, and just by protecting the UK will not protect everybody. And so the initiative has been a critical part of our activities and what we've done. And the first thing, as you mentioned, is the UK has contributed north of £500 million to the COVAX initiative. So it is very clear that this is a core part of what the UK's strategy is and how we can actually contribute to controlling the global pandemic. So cash is part of it, but actually one of the ways I think we can support is to continue sharing what we've learned as part of building the portfolio for the UK in the first place. So we have put in place, obviously, the technical experts, the manufacturing experts, regulatory, clinical trial. So all of that we've done, and that is something that has been available to the COVAX team so that we can actually share anything that's non-confidential with them so that that can be accelerated. Because frankly, I think as a world, to have taken 9 months to get to where we are, to have a single facility for vaccine procurement and distribution is just far too slow. And if this facility was already in place, you wouldn't need to have any bilateral agreements. You would go straight into a framework that says, this is how it works. This is, each country can decide how they want to contribute, what proportions of vaccines they want, or basically what proportion of their population do they want to protect. And then the self-financing countries can go ahead and contribute funds to the purchase of vaccines for low and middle income countries. So for me, the biggest weakness so far has been the speed at which the international community has got together to think about actually vaccinating the world. It's been astonishingly quick in terms of getting vaccines through preclinical and clinical development. So I think the scientists and the clinicians have moved mountains. I think the manufacturing that we've seen, especially in countries like India. I was speaking to the Serum Institute family today, and it's been absolutely astonishing how well they've worked. But globally, we've not done a good job in bringing us the whole group together to actually have a permanent facility. And this is something that I think we need to come out of this with a better template of how to do it.
Thank you. So, Minister Vardhan, if I could maybe turn back to you. You gave a very eloquent summary of how India has responded to the current crisis in terms of sort of the treatment and the power of the health workers and the leadership of the government. But I'd like to draw on both Kate and Kiran's points about the need for stronger public-private partnerships and a different kind of infrastructure to address these kind of issues going forward, and particularly in terms of investment in research and development and scientific research and development, the kind of tools that Bill was talking about. And I know India has long been a global leader there, but this feels like a very important opportunity to perhaps take an even further step. And I know it's one of your priorities, so I'd love you to reflect on what you see India's future role in across the board on these issues.
Thank you, Mark. You see, right now, as far as managing COVID is concerned, the whole country has learned quite a bit about it. And we are trying to manage as well as possible, and we hope to be able to control the transmission of the disease in a very, very significant manner in the coming months. Right now, our simultaneous focus has been, of course, with involvement of everybody, whether it is the public sector or the private sector or the corporate world, everybody is involved. And we are now ensuring that we are planning for activities that we have to actually do after a couple of months. On the vaccine front, you know that we have always been on the forefront on the issues of vaccine, whether it is supply of vaccines or the manufacturing of vaccines, and 70% of the vaccines we are trying to over the years trying to help the poor and the middle income countries through either help of Gavi or through the UNICEF, etc. Right now, our focus on one hand has been to ensure that the whole of scientific community is supporting and encouraging and getting involved with the industry and the relevant stakeholders in developing the vaccine. We have at the moment 30 vaccine candidates which are in various phases, and these vaccine candidates are all, most of them are supported by our science ministry, particularly biotechnology also. Three candidates are in the indigenous candidates are either in the advanced phase 2 of the trials, or one is in the advanced phase 3 trials. We are simultaneously, although we are expecting that the vaccine we should be able to get by the end of this year or maybe early next year, but there is an exhaustive planning going on. This is in response to Kiran Mazumdar Shahji also, who apprehended that probably the country may be not focusing on the rural India. We are focusing on each and every part of India, and already we have developed a master plan for ensuring that the delivery of the vaccines to the last person, that is ensured with, of course, the cold chain management. You know, we have already eradicated polio. We have already a very robust universal immunization program in which we give 12 vaccines to every child in the country. And right now, we have also developed an electronic portal where everything around the vaccine, starting from its manufacturing, storage, to its delivery to the last person. Along with this, there is already a online training activity which has been planned for exhaustively for the workers who are supposed to be giving these vaccines. So virtually on every front, we have made adequate preparations, and this all is happening with everybody's support. We are in touch with the international organizations. We are in touch with the solidarity programs happening at the international level with WHO and of course all the international organizations. And we are very confident, howsoever big our country may be. But as we have been able to tackle COVID pandemic in the last 9 months, in the next 9 months or so, our rough estimate is that by June, July, we should be able to procure 400 to 500 million doses of vaccine and give them to almost 20 to 25 crore people in India. We have already prioritized who are the people who have to receive the vaccine first, whether it is the health worker or the frontline worker or those with comorbidities, and the lists are also being prepared. The state governments have also been brought on board. So it's a very exhaustive, very meticulous, very pragmatic, and very solid exercise that is already happening in India. The Prime Minister is personally monitoring it. There is an expert group which is personally monitoring and getting into the nitty-gritty of each and every aspect of it. And I can assure the whole world that our thinking is very clear, that the technology could be local, but the science has to be universal. And whatever is the outcome of our scientific research, it will be shared with everyone all across the world. We feel that the global world is one family, and when we are working something in India, you know that during the peak of the epidemic, we supported over 150 countries with hydroxychloroquine. We supplied them to these countries. And even now, we are in a position to supply many things to the other countries, including vaccines. So we are confident that India will certainly be able to show some very progressive path to the rest of the world also. And we assure you that we will not let you down on any account.
Great. Thank you, Minister. It's a very inspiring vision, and we share that with you. So in our last few minutes, and we're going to try and move pretty quickly because I'd love to have Bill, CD, and Kate in particular just is thinking about the preparing for the next pandemic, that we know we have these big logistical challenges, but we also have an aspiration, and CD Director Moeti touched on it, with regards to what kind of infrastructure and systems do we need to put in place, both in terms of at the global response R&D and what can we do better at regional, national level. So Bill, if I could start with you, just a couple of minutes each, please.
Great. Well, I touched on the R&D area where I think we will have billions of dollars of additional investments in the platforms in the different areas. I think equally importantly is how do we be ready to respond to an emergency out in the field. And there I think we can see that the resources that we built up for the polio work, for the malaria work, came in and were extremely valuable in helping with dealing with this pandemic. And so I think that model where we beef up surveillance, where we beef up ongoing tracking of current infectious diseases, knowing that those resources need to be designed so that if an emergency takes place, that then that other disease work is put on hold and you move over to the emergency work. Any other approach doesn't really give you the true skill sets that are practiced and have the relationships and the tools in place to do the work. And so I think we need to put an equal emphasis on how we have more field capacity, which can be used for some wonderful causes when there's not a pandemic, and have that available as the core so that the field part is ready to go very, very quickly.
Okay, thank you. Kate, maybe you next, please.
Thank you. So, of course, I agree with that, but I actually think we need to swing for the fences a bit more, because Kiran was very articulate talking about the challenges of deployment. And frankly, that's not good enough. We can't have vaccines that require cold chains, require needles, require more than one dose. So we have to spend the billions of research dollars, in part, in actually optimizing the vaccine formats themselves. We need to understand whether it's CD8 responses, neutralizing antibody responses, mucosal immunity. Those are the things that we should be investing research money into. And that's where academia and small companies are very good. Where I think industry and governments can come together is on the actual development. So to actually scale up the manufacturing and fill finish so that we can actually build and make those single dose, ideally oral or transdermal or possibly intranasal vaccines. We've got to get away from cold chains. That's just not going to work. And so I think where we will work in the UK is we'll have a stream in terms of funding the underlying research to get better vaccines that actually do the job more potently and obviously safely, and then use government funding with industry. And for example, we've got our Vaccines Manufacturing Innovation Centre, where we can actually do some of that process development to really take these very clever new advances such as mRNA and turn them into something that's just much more stable and able to be deployed, that doesn't require minus 80-degree cold chains and so on, which clearly isn't going to stand up in global health discussions.
Great. Thank you, Kate. And yes, those are exactly the kind of challenges and call to action that everyone at this conference, we hope, will be inspired by. But Director Moeti, just to you quickly, this all needs to then be implemented in the field. It has to reach people. It has to actually be part of a wider infrastructure. And you touched on that earlier, just maybe your closing thoughts very quickly on what you think needs to come to help prevent the next epidemic.
Yes, I think I do think the latest developments have been very encouraging. The speed with which some of what has been learned from the last epidemics, Ebola, has been put together. I think that the solidarity mechanisms with a view to equity in access at a global level could be strengthened, so that some of the delicate issues that have been discussed, pooling some resources, pooling the patents, pooling knowledge, can come on board faster. You know, when I think African ministers and politicians at the continental level, they are very concerned about this global solidarity. Will it finally translate at the end of the day? And then on the ground, there are huge concerns about the challenges in operations in delivering this vaccine when it comes available. To me, this speaks to the idea of investing in advance of the next pandemic in the national health systems in countries, so that they have the capability in terms of our procurement systems, the human resources, what you need to do to get a vaccine out to the most farthest people in the most disadvantaged places in Africa. And then finally, how to put together the financing for this in advance. I think the World Bank has been talking about this. There are very many ideas floating around. We need to concretize these before we get to a moment of panic and crisis with the next pandemic. And then finally, just to make a plug for establishing at the global level the room for the rich capacity in African scientists to have a continental platform, so that they interface with getting ideas from people who are confronting the challenges of delivery in our context, can be brought on board at the global level in the research that is carried on. Thank you. I'll stop there. I know we have a time challenge.
Great. Well, thank you, Director Moeti, and with apologies to everyone for, this is a panel that we could have got easily done for 2 hours, 3 hours, because it covers so many critical areas and issues across industry, government, the public and private sector. But certainly I found it a very inspirational and provocative set of issues and challenges. I hope all of you did too. And it is my great pleasure at this point to hand over in full so that we can all listen to Prime Minister Modi's remarks. So thank you all very much.